Hey, and welcome back. So today, wanted to do a review on three of the newer cast iron pans that are being produced in America. Like a lot of people, I'm kind of being drawn back to cast iron, moving away from non-stick pans, sort of the questions surrounding that, and giving cast iron a second look. Like a lot of people, I went to Lodge, and they make a great product, have a lot of love for Lodge, have a lot of their products. But after you use them a little bit, sometimes you begin to understand why there are a lot of videos out there about sanding them down and creating different finishes on the inside of them. And you eventually start to look at vintage. A lot of the vintage ones, as soon as you pick them up and look at them, you can see that they are cast with a much finer grain on the metal, and there was some real work done on finishing them. I have a Perry World War II, I think it was made in the late 40s or early 50s, Wagner pan. I'll see if I can catch the shine on this a little bit so that you can see the old-fashioned, you know, label on the back here, whatnot. And this is one of those pans that I got, the typical yard sale thing. It showed up, took a look at it, and just had to pick it up for a moment and hold the handle and see the grain on the side of it. And you realize, wait a minute, this is really cast very different than modern cast iron. The inside is smooth in a way that, and I'm trying to catch some of the shine on this, and it's like not totally doing it for me. But at any rate, the inside of this is much smoother, obviously has been polished, and you begin to understand quickly why vintage cast iron has such a following. The walls on this are pretty thin. It's relatively, all things being considered, cast iron isn't exactly what I would consider a light product, but pretty good. And the weight-wise, when you get some of the vintage ones. So like everybody, I go back to cast iron. I started to get some Lodge, liked what I had and liked how it cooked. But then you start to discover vintage and you go, wow, actually these work better because they're so much smoother. And so then you look around and you say, well, is there anything out there nowadays that's more that I can get a hold of easily that maybe doesn't cost as much as vintage? Sometimes with vintage, you got to resurface them. They're got to wobble. They might be warped, on and on and on and on. And you begin to discover some of the newer manufacturers. So I've put together three of them here today that I want to go over. And they are all American made. Just a brief aside here, and then I promise I'll get to the review. I don't really like foreign made cast iron pans. Um, when I say foreign, I say certain areas of the world. I don't really want to start naming areas. Buying a Le Creuset from France, no, I have no problems with that or concerns about that at all. We have some Le Creuset and it cooks beautifully. It's wonderfully made stuff. But certain areas of the world, and I think you know where I'm talking about, it's a little questionable what kind of ingredients are being used to make them. Cast iron is oftentimes made of scrap metal. What is that scrap metal? What's going into it? These things are designed to be used for the rest of your life, if not like 100 years if you take relatively good care of it. So do you really want a chance having God knows what in a pan that you directly cook your food on that your grandkids could be using as a cooking implement? I don't. The extra 40 or 50 bucks or whatever it is that I might save on it is not worth it as far as I'm concerned. There are American companies that make their products elsewhere. You would assume that there is a fair bit of quality control with it, but I'm still kind of like, no, not doing it. And in the end, I also, the patriotic side, I kind of dig the idea of hiring Americans and your neighbors of sorts and helping them to get ahead. So gathered three of the pans, have my handy dandy notes. Let's get to it. So the first pan I want to go over is a Finex. It is, I'll try to get this to see if you can read this. It is a number 8. And the numbering systems on most of these pans do not correlate very well with anything to do with size or dimension. They are based upon old-fashioned numbers that, my understanding is, relegated to the size of the disc of an opening on an old wood-fired cast iron cooking stove that from the late 1800s that were in people's kitchens. But this one's a number 8. It's actually only about a 6-inch cook surface as far as coming across this. It's a bit of a smaller pan. I actually really like that. Personally, this particular size I really use a lot. Cooking a couple of eggs on something like this works out very well. So I have a Lodge number 8 and a Finex number 8, and this will be the first pan we'll kind of go over. So some of the pros on this in terms of, after talking about cooking surface, we've talked about it's about 6.5 inch on this. Before I get to the pros, let me talk a little more about, we've got the handle on this. The Finex has this spring handle, which does a remarkably good job of dissipating heat. When you go to Finex and you look at some of their videos, they talk about these as being a design they took from somewhere else. They had some pictures on one of the videos that were from cast iron pans from a long while ago. And if you've ever seen old-fashioned wood stoves, oftentimes the handles and sometimes the levers that are used to lift the plates had this sort of a spring on it. I got to say, it works. The handle is one of those great implements, or great elements of this implement, that's your interface. It's what you touch, you hold, it's what you work with all the time. The cooking surface is, of course, not only in the size, but how it's finished. Well, that's why you buy it, because you're cooking with it. But the handle is very important next onto that. So the handle on this, the shape and the size relative to this, it's a relatively larger handle, all things said. Certainly the diameter of the spring material is quite big on this, and it dissipates heat pretty well. The end here, there's a solid rod of cast iron that goes through it. This sort of brass piece on the end will end up getting warmer because the heat conducts through. I mean, cast iron conducts heat pretty well. That's why we all use it. But all things considered, in large part, you can hold this without any, if you're frying with it, without any kind of, needing a pot holder or mitt, anything like that. For long periods of time when you're cooking, it dissipates a lot of heat. It works really well. This is one of those things that, to be honest with you, once you use it a little bit, you will wonder why nobody else uses it as well, because it can't be a patented design element, maybe some element of the specific shape or something, but the concept is taken from somewhere else. This really works. The cooking surface itself, I'll try to see if I can get some of the shine to sort of hit on this. With Finex, their basic shape is this sort of octagonal shape, which is kind of their thing, so that visually you know it's theirs. The angles are supposed to create a bit of a pouring surface so that you can pour out liquids and whatnot. Works okay with that. It's not like, changing the Earth's axis, but it works okay. The bottom of the pan, the actual cooked surface, is machined smooth. Very well done. It works really well. Takes a finish well. The food releases. It's done quite well. Somewhat of a downside, and I won't probably be able to make this show entirely, and on all of the websites for these pans, they have close-up pictures of their items. So if you really want a little more in-depth on that, you can get that. I'm just going to kind of give you my impression of it. These sides here are polished a bit, but there's still a fair pebble or grain in them. I would say that this is similar to what a Lodge is. It's got a bit of grain on it. The bottom of this is better. It's machined very nicely, very smooth, but the sides aren't. Plus and minuses to that. The weight and the thickness of it. This is a relatively thick cast iron all the way around on this. The bottom and the sides appears to be relatively even as far as there doesn't seem to be like a thicker disc of it at the bottom like some of them have. And so it's relatively heavy. Again, plus or minus. I like that on a certain level because it gives you, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of a heat momentum. Once the pan is warmed up, it really doesn't cool off quickly. So you have a really good ability to cook evenly, brown things, and I like that. weight is going to be one of those things. If this was a large pan rather than a small one, I suspect that these are actually quite heavy. May take a little bit longer to warm up, but give you a really good heat momentum. So we've talked a little bit about the finish on the inside. The outside of this, the finish is actually done pretty well. You can probably see from the reflection here. It's been sanded down a little bit. Some attention has been paid to it. The casting itself is really quite well done. Again, there's some grain on the sides of this that try to get some of the reflection there to catch it, so you can see it a little bit. It's not inappropriate, it's not bad, but it's a little bit rougher on the outside. It is what it is. It doesn't really impact how it cooks or whatever. It just is what it is. I make mention of it for that purpose only. But otherwise, again, cooking surface is good. The sides. Now, I'm going to try and hold this a little bit to the side here, and you can see the angle of how the sides come out on this. Some of the cookware that you'll find, the sides are more straight up and down relatively to, comparatively to the cooking surface. And some of them cant that out a little bit, and it makes it easier to be able to get in to access food. The Finex is actually splayed out a fair bit. I don't want to quite say a 45-degree angle, but it's got a fair tip on it. Now, what does that matter? It matters on a little bit in that because there's more surface area, and if you have this lined up on a burner, I have a sealed burner stove, the heat tends to be mostly just through conduction, contact. If you had a flame, a gas burner, I suspect it wouldn't matter at all because you'd have that sort of Coanda effect and the hot air would curve around the outside and would heat the sides just fine. For me, the sides can sometimes tend to be a little bit cooler if I'm not really careful about letting it warm up a little bit. And couple that with the inside not being fully finished like the rest of the pan, and what you can end up with is the sides, food can stick to a little bit more. Is what it is. But all in all, a pretty good pan. So to kind of go over the pros, obviously the cook surface, as we talked about, the bottom is well done. The sides, not so much. Another thing with Finex that you'll find is that they're quite available. The product line is much larger than the other two companies. They have a number of different sizes, accessories with it, covers, grill pans, all kinds of stuff on it, and the product's available. You go on their website, you send them the money, they send you the pan. Bada bing, and it shows up in no time flat. That's actually a good thing. They are heavy so that you get a stability, probably, in my opinion, less likely to warp if they're a little heavier cast. They also take a little longer to heat up, but the heat momentum is really quite good. I also like the fact that for this particular company that they make this smaller version of it because I find this size very useful for many things. Cooking up a couple of eggs for breakfast in the morning, this is just about the perfect one. The handle on this is, to be honest, spectacular. This is better than anything else out there on the market. It's fantastic. Why would you wax poetic over a handle? Use one of these for a little while, not have to worry about burning your hand. And I'm telling you, that's a big deal. The handle on this is fantastic. They're awesome. You'll use one for a while and you'll go, why doesn't everybody else do it? So that's the Finex. Next is the Field. Try and get this so that you can see this. This is a Field number 8. But this number 8 is about a 9-inch cooking surface when you measure the bottom of it here. The Field is one of the last newer entries as far as that goes, and is really cast. To be honest with you, the casting on this is really quite good. The outside is a little bit of a pebble and a grain. I don't know if you can see that entirely from there, but it's much more even and consistent. It just looks like the casting on this is probably a little bit better than the other two that we're going to talk about here today. Attention to detail, some of the fine detail is really pretty good. The cook surface, like I said, is about a 9-inch when you're talking about the flat surface on it. The handle on this is a somewhat traditional, old-fashioned cast iron one. Has a nice bit of a groove here, which actually helps improve your ability to hang on to it, but it's not very large, not very big, and it's mounted in a relatively solid point here, which may be stable, but can have its downside. Let me show you as a comparison with the old-fashioned Wagner. So this is our old-fashioned Wagner, and this is our, sorry for the clinking, the Field. When you put the two together, the handles are almost identical. The pans are pretty much the same size. So why does that matter? Well, if you like the traditional old-fashioned Wagner, you're going to like the handle on the Field. But if you recognize that one of the downsides of the old-fashioned cast iron is the handle gets hot pretty quickly in almost anything you cook with, and it's not very long, so you don't have a lot of leverage. There isn't much of a balance point here, though, because it's so short. Now, it probably takes up less space, it does, on the cooktop, so you don't have to worry about having as much room. And if you were going to slide this in the oven, this is going to take up less space. But the handle, going to get hot. It's a nice shape. It's it's about the same width, same length. Again, the little groove is nice, but you can get a good handle on it. And it has a decent enough little helper handle. It's kind of small, but it's there. Same thing with the Finex, has a little thing there. So, worst case scenario, you can kind of get a hang on it. But handle-wise, maybe not the strongest point. The Finex, or the Field, good grief, I keep doing that. The Field is, they talk quite a bit about their thin wall casting, and they're right. This is cast very much like the Wagner from that peri-World War II era. It's not very thick. The bottom of it is thicker. If you were to, you can pinch fingers on the side and you can tell the depth. If you were pinching the bottom, you can tell the bottom feels like almost twice as thick as the side walls. That's probably a good thing because I'd be concerned that it could warp. It also has a little bit of the old-fashioned kind of gas ring, the little raised ring here. That probably adds perhaps a little more stability, and maybe I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt. But it is cast thinner, and therefore it is lighter weight. If you're someone who has arthritic hands or wrists, someone who doesn't like the weight of a cast iron pan over an aluminum one, the Field is definitely something you should look into. The sides of this have a bit of a, if you can see this, I'm trying to figure out what would be the best way to do it. It's a bit of a curve. It's not quite a full angular tip. It does give you some space to be able to get in there with like a spatula or a spoon or something if you're working at your food, but it has a bit of a unique shape that, according to them, means that they don't have to have the little dimple for draining off fluids. This works because of this curve. It seems to work okay. I don't know. I might tend to lean towards the dimple works better, and the Finex with the angles there, that seems to work better as well. It works, but it's not, The cooking surface on this. I'm going to try and show this a little bit too. I don't know how much of this you can see. The surface on this is very finely polished. The sides on this are sanded down very, very smooth. The bottom of this almost reminded me when I first got it of like an old-fashioned LP record. There are little tiny grooves that look to be concentric rings that are cut into the bottom. It's obviously machined, very smooth, and then it looks like they engraved the grooves in it. Works very well to take a seasoning, holds that well, and because it's so smooth, food doesn't stick on it hardly at all. It's a very nice finish on the inside, works well. And so let's look at, let me go through my notes here, make sure I don't forget anything, but I tried to make sure I go over. And we'll go over the pros and the cons. The pros of the Field, as we said before, the casting is excellent. Probably inherent, just general casting, this is probably the best of all of them. The grain is remarkably equal all the way around on the outside and on this. There's minimal finishing on the outside, in part because the casting in and of itself inherently is that good. It's cast really well. It's lightweight. The thin walls, with the bottom being thicker, I think you'd have a little better element If it was all that thin wall, it wouldn't have a lot of heat momentum. The bottom disc does seem to help out with that, but it doesn't have as much heat momentum as some of the other ones because it is a little bit thinner. And could you potentially have a question about whether or not this might warp easier? Maybe, maybe, I don't know. And the cooking surface, the finish is very, very good, including the fact that the sides are polished as well as the bottom. Food doesn't stick to the side, warms up evenly. So all in all, many good qualities to recommend about the Field. The availability of this one is probably in the middle of the pack, at least for right now. My experience has been the time was about 6 months-ish. And if that seems like a long time, that's not out of the realm of reality when you're talking about a smaller company that's trying to get its feet underneath it. I'm guessing that time frame might be down a little bit. I received this last spring, so almost 9 months ago as of the time of when I did this. They're also introducing a size 10, which is another few inches larger. So I think you're going to see that this company is starting to get its feet underneath it. The production's hopefully catching up with demand, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're looking at 3-4 months or so at least before it'll show up. So demand is a little bit of one of those things. As far as I don't know, is that a con? Maybe a little bit. It'd be nice that hopefully they're probably all aiming to get to a place where it's just going to show up, but they aren't there yet. The handle size is the other sort of con. The handle on this is relatively small. It's mounted securely, but it gets warm. It doesn't dissipate heat that much. It's not to say that that's the end of the world. It's going to be very much like an old-fashioned pan. But having said that, it's going to be like an old-fashioned pan. It's going to get hot, and that's a downside to some people because you're going to have to deal with, you need to have a pot holder. So that is the Field number 8. And lastly in our grouping here is the Stargazer, and I'll try and see if I can get this to the Stargazer 10.5-inch cast iron pan. Now the cooking surface on this, when you actually measure from inside the wall where it's tipping, is actually about 9 inches or so, maybe a little bit more, but it's relatively speaking, it's virtually the same size. I'll show you I'll put the Field inside the Stargazer, and you can see that they are essentially the same size, very close, perhaps ever so slightly larger with the Stargazer. So the size, like we said, a little over 9. The handle on this, that is one of the things that on this, for a traditional just solid piece of cast iron, is an interesting design change. This has a little bit of a curve in it, as well as a forked connection part. And I don't know if you can see that entirely. The back of this is actually quite sanded down and attended to, so that when you grab this, not only do you have some length and you have some ability to disperse heat because of this forked thing. This is a bit of a thin handle with a fair bit of surface area. The curve on it, you can get a good handle on it. You can get a good grip. And it dissipates heat pretty well. It will, if you're cooking for a fair bit of time, for a longer period of time, it will start to get a little warmer because the cast iron will transmit the heat. But it does a pretty good job, as all things considered, as far as dissipating heat. So this isn't a bad compromise. I don't know if you can see from here. The top of this, though, is a little bit rough in terms of the grain of the metal here. It's been sanded of sorts. There was a little bit of some attention paid to it because you can feel that a little bit. But it probably could have used a little more attention. I'm really getting picky here, mind you. But the rest of this, as we go into it, is a lot of attention has been paid to it. But the handle is pretty good. It's actually quite nice. It's much longer. Let me show you that one more time compared to the old Wagner. I'll set it in the Wagner here and just put the two together, give you an idea. It's definitely a longer handle by about probably 3-4 inches, And with the forked opening here, it really does a good job of dissipating heat. The other thing on this, as far as handles go, and my wife really appreciates this, this has a very large, very helpful helper handle. It works better than the other ones, clearly. And with the opening here and the distance from the actual pan itself, again, dissipates heat pretty good. This is going to get hot. You probably need to use a pot handle. But this is a really strong, solid handle. It's connected quite well with the feet that it has in the same way that the other part of the handle is. It's solidly cast in it. But the distance and having it set away from the actual main body of the pan works well. The back side, the finish of this, I'll try and have you see. You can see that they had done a lot of sanding actually in the middle here at one point in order to probably flatten it out. But otherwise, the casting is reasonably rough. Even lodge, that would be like, rough, kind of like a rough lodge one. They have done some sanding here. The handles have been polished down a little bit, but the actual casting itself, while decently done, the letters and the numbers and all of the stuff in it come through, and they did a decent job. There's nothing wrong with it. But the casting is a little bit rough to begin with. And so they did some work on it. Probably could have, maybe someday they'll do a little bit more attention to some of this, polishing it up. It's when you get into this kind of area in cookware and the specialty of this, it's the little details that make a difference. The big helper handle, the forked element on this, those little details make a huge difference in the positive for this pan. Some of the things about the roughness on it, maybe not doing enough polishing on the handle, detract from it slightly. The weight and the thickness of it, this is a heavy pan. This is cast thick, very similar to the Finex. So it's not a lightweight pan. Maybe that's part of the reason why they have such a good helper handle. The bottom of it feels to be about the same thickness as the sides, but it's a pretty thick casting. Has very good heat momentum. There's a lot of cast iron here. Once you get it warmed up, it does a great job. You can throw food in it, and it doesn't suddenly go cold on you. Looking through my notes here, the inner cook surface, of course. That's the point of why you think about a cast iron from Stargazer. The inner surface of this is sanded down. It's not a mirror finish, but it's about as close as you can get without being there. The inner surface of this is perfect. I just don't know what else to say. When you open up one of these brand new, if you have never used one of the higher end, better cast iron pans, your jaw will drop. The inner surface on this is perfect, utterly perfect. There was nothing wrong with it in any way, shape, or form. I'll say this 2 or 3 more times. It's that good. The inner surface on this was perfect. Takes a seasoning, no problem. The food comes off as easy as anything else could be. So what are the downsides then? Well, there's a big one. Not only the heaviness, which may or may not be a downside for you. Certainly being able to leverage a heavier pan, that may be a downside. But the real downside to the Stargazer is the time to get the pan. Now, I ordered this shortly after they had started opening up. So I was really early on the list with this. And they went through problems where their first foundry, they had to get a second foundry. And then this fall, I want to say I read something about they're even moving their production to somewhere else. This took me almost 9 months to get this. And to be truthful, I wasn't even sure it was even going to show up. At that point, I was beginning to think it was the lost cause. But it did show up. So credit to them. They got me in my pan. But you're talking a long time before this bad boy is going to show up. Now, hopefully that will get better as time goes forward. Maybe that's already better on a certain level. And to be honest, I got this again almost 8 months or so from when I'm filming this in late 2017, but be prepared. You may end up having to wait for a while before this thing shows up, but it's worth it. It really is worth it. So let me set this down, and I'll kind of wrap up a little bit about where I'm at with these. And sorry I'm going on so long. So let me state by saying, first off, if any of these pans had arrived 10 years ago, they would have been a revelation. The cooking world would have written about them in glowing terms because, quite honestly, you could be happy with any one of these and they would serve you just perfectly. You'd be very happy with them. And if you didn't see one, if you didn't see the other, and you didn't have any sense of, okay, maybe that trait is something I want or another, you'd be absolutely happy with any of them. So without hesitation, I would recommend any of these for you. They all are superb. If weight is an issue, for me personally, I would say the Field is the one to think about. That's one of their things that they talk about a lot, and it's true. It is lighter, and probably for some people, that would make it a more comfortable pan to use. So putting it in my order, number 3 out of my 3 is the Field pan. As mentioned, the weight is one of the primary benefits of this. The casting on this, as we talked about, is excellent. It's better than the other ones. The finish on the inside is very good. It really is. 10 years ago, this pan would have set the world on fire and everybody would have been like, that is awesome. The downsides we talked about are kind of minimal, but for me, mostly, it's the handle. If the handle was better on this, this would be a slam dunk. But it isn't. You know, at this point in time, where you're reimagining the whole process of what a cast iron pan can be, because nobody knows anymore. It isn't like these have been out in everybody's kitchen for the last 50 years. Almost nobody's been using them in some regards. So you have a blank check. Do whatever you want. In this case, I'd say Field, yeah, you probably should lengthen the handle, maybe at least put sort of a forked connection point so that you can get some air through there and cool it off a little bit. That to me is the real downside. But I'm really being picky here. I'm telling you as much as I can, this is an awesome pan, especially if light weight is a concern for you. There's no question. You buy this. This will come, takes a little bit of time. It's finished great. The casting is superb. But that's number 3 for me. Number 2 is the Finex. For me, this one is my favorite around here in terms of, but that's size, I think, more than anything else. So I'm trying to step away from that and make this decision based upon other factors. The overall casting on the outside and on the inside is good. It's in the ballpark with everything else. The shape itself works well. The machining on the bottom is good. It actually works just fine. The problem with this is the sides. These also are expensive. Finex is very easily available. They have a broad product line. They make a great product. Again, you would be happy with this, and you would really be happy with it. 10 years ago, everybody would be like, wow, this is awesome. Now, when compared to some of the other ones, you begin to see a little bit of some of the things where you'd go, maybe you could do that a little better, especially at the cost price. You got to factor in cost on some level. These are expensive. I mean, like, ow, expensive. Go online, you can look it up. These are like, ow, expensive. Having said that, they're an awesome pan. Cooks really well. It's probably the heaviest of all the 3. This smaller pan weighs about as much almost as the full-size pans. The cook surface where you're going to do, let's be honest, 95, 99% of all of your cooking is on there, is really well done. Takes the finish well, the food releases well. The handle is spectacular. When you cook with one of these for a little while, the handle is a knock it out of the park home run. just spectacular. These are fabulous, just awesome. I know you're thinking, really, it's just the handle, but I'm telling you, work with one of these bad boys for a while, and you're going to be like, why am I dealing with these other cast iron pans where I burn myself all the time? I'm kind of a nut about it and interested in it, so I bought one of all of these different things. But if you're only going to get one or two pans, this is the one to get. These are great. They're really well done, and the handle alone is almost worth, cringing enough to write the check or hit the send button with your credit card when you go to buy it. Expensive, heavy, but available, and gosh, that handle is awesome. And that leaves us with number one. This was not what I expected. I'm going to be honest with you. I was really frustrated with the company when it came time to finally have this pan show up. I kind of had written it off. I didn't get an awful lot of information from them. And, they were always, if I sent them an email, they'd get back to me. But, it wasn't what I considered spectacular communication, and a whole lot of time had gone by since they were sitting on my money, and I was thinking, this thing's gone, But to their credit, it came in, and it's awesome. This is a pan that I didn't expect to think so much of it. The outside casting is a little rough. Probably could use a little more attention to detail with that. I'm really, really being picky. The handle itself, again, little more attention to detail to that. But if I'm going to nitpick over tiny details that I think they can improve, I got to give them credit for the tiny details and the not so tiny details that they did right. The helper handle, they did right. That is the way all helper handles should be. It may take more space up in the stove, on the top or in the oven, but I'm telling you, this handle works really well. The design is elegant, it looks nice, it's well cast, it doesn't get as hot, and you can really get a hold of this. I mean, really get a hold of it so that you can lift the pan and move it to where you want it to go. My wife, as I think I alluded to earlier, this is her favorite feature of it. It's that good. The handle itself, the forked connection point, really works. The longer, thinner curved handle allows you to get a good grip on it because of the curve and dissipates heat really well. This really works. And then lastly, but by no means in any way, shape, or form least, is the interior finish. The finish on this, I'll say it a couple more times because you just have to wax poetic over it. The finish on this was perfect. Nothing could be done better. It was perfect. This thing cooks like a dream. It's heavy, so it has good momentum for the heat. The helper handle, the long handle, it all works well. This was a surprise to me because I really thought that my bias towards the field, which I've had longer than the other ones, was going to carry the day. This one, my wife and I, after cooking with it a while, she grabs this one all the time and says, I'm going to use the Stargazer. So when it's all done and said, hats off to you guys. I hope you can get to a place where your production catches up with the demand because the demand really should be there. My number one is the Stargazer pan. It's really that good. And that's about it. I've droned on for an awful lot of time. Hopefully some of you have hung through to the whole end here and kind of liked what we've come up with today. As always, put some comments down there if you disagree with me or if you have some questions about it. Don't give me the, don't give me the stuff about the why didn't you do Lodge or something like that. I had a certain group of pans that I wanted to try and do, and I appreciate that. Like I said, that people have a lot of loyalty towards Lodge, and so do I. But that's my 3-pan review, and I hope you enjoyed it all. Let me know if you have any questions, concerns, and whatnot, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.